Adults pay rent, Mom. You're not an exception." The words rolled out of Daniel's mouth with the flat tone of a banker denying a loan, not a son speaking to the woman who gave him life. He didn't even look up from his coffee mug when he said it. The spoon clinked against the porcelain cup, an ordinary sound that landed like a hammer inside my chest. My phone slipped from my fingers and hit the tiled floor with a thud, far heavier than its weight. For a second, the world shrank to that noise. The dull, final drop of glass and metal, like the gavel of a judge sentencing me. I sat frozen in the middle of my own kitchen. The cabinets gleamed with their sterile white paint, the marble counters spotless, but the air felt colder than the November wind outside. I could smell the faint bitterness of roasted coffee, and beneath it, the sting of betrayal. Daniel was 40 years old now, taller than his father had ever been, with the same sharp jawline. But that morning, I could barely recognize him. His voice had no trace of the boy who once ran to me crying with scraped knees. It was the voice of a stranger, rehearsed, efficient, merciless. I pressed my palm against the wooden table to steady myself. My body betrayed me. My hands shook, my throat closed, my heart slammed against my ribs as though it wanted out. "Daniel." My voice cracked. The single syllable felt like I was calling to someone standing on the other side of a cliff. He finally looked at me, but not with softness. His eyes were steady, sharp, expectant like a landlord waiting for rent. "I've carried you for 78 years, I whispered, though the words came out more to myself than to him. "And now you ask me to pay to stay alive in my own house?" He didn't flinch. He just took another sip of coffee. The silence after that stretched, filling the room like fog. Every tick of the clock on the wall was a needle in my ear. The kitchen had never felt so hostile, the light above us too bright, exposing every wrinkle on my hands, every tremor in my body. I thought back, without wanting to, of the decades of bills I had paid for him, university tuition checks that emptied my savings, the hospital bills when his wife gave birth, the mortgage payments I helped cover when he lost his job. Each dollar, each sacrifice, given with the faith that family meant forever. And now, this. The words replayed, echoing, "Adults pay rent, Mom. You're not an exception." I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand he take them back. But my lips only moved in silence, like a prayer gone unanswered. I could feel the betrayal with every sense. The kitchen smelled not of coffee anymore, but of iron, like blood. The air was thick, harder to breathe. My legs felt stiff, as if the chair had grown around me, trapping me in place. Daniel reached for a stack of envelopes on the counter: bills, contracts, demands. He slid one across to me without ceremony. "Just sign this, and it'll all be simpler," he said. His tone was businesslike, a customer service script delivered to his own mother. The paper touched my skin like ice. My signature line was already marked, waiting. I looked at him again, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that I would see some flicker of guilt, of hesitation. There was none, only calculation. It was then, in that piercing moment, that I realized something. This wasn't just about money. This was about erasing me. Because if I signed, I would no longer be Margaret Wilson, mother, woman, human being. I would be a purse with a name on it, nothing more. I wanted to tell him that I remembered his first words, his first steps, the nights I stayed awake sewing his school costumes, the mornings I left work early to watch his basketball games. But I also knew those memories were mine alone now, not his. He had severed them the moment he opened his mouth. My fingers curled into fists on the table. I lifted my head, though my vision blurred. "I never thought," I whispered, "that my own blood would look at me and see nothing but a walking wallet." The sentence hung in the air, raw and trembling. For the first time, Daniel shifted in his seat, but only slightly. His eyes narrowed, calculating again. I stared back, my body quaking but my voice steadier. I needed him to hear me, to understand what his words had done. That day, my son's words didn't just ask for money, they cut the cord of blood between us. And with that realization, something inside me cracked. Not in weakness, but in awakening. The green bank ledger lies on my kitchen table even now. Its cover is worn, the corners bent, the ink on the spine nearly faded. Every time I open it, the pages whisper numbers that used to mean hope. Now, they cut deeper than any blade. I flip it open, and the smell of old paper rises, mixed with faint traces of ink and coffee stains. My fingers graze the first entry. September 1999. 1-200 wired to Daniel's tuition account at Columbia University, New York. Back then, $1,200 was my entire monthly salary as a nurse in the city hospital. I'd hand over the bills I collected during double shifts, wrists aching from lifting patients, feet swollen inside white shoes gone gray, and watch the clerk type Daniel's name into the system. Each keystroke felt like a promise that his future would be brighter than mine. I remember calling him that first autumn. "Daniel, don't worry about tuition. I'll cover it," I said, my voice tired but determined. On the other end, his 20-year-old voice was warm, earnest, almost shy. "Someday, I'll buy you a house by the sea, Mom. You'll never have to work again." Those words became my lullaby. They rocked me to sleep on nights when exhaustion blurred my vision. They pushed me through cafeteria dinners of instant noodles and tap water, nights when the smell of antiseptic clung to my hair. By December 2001, the ledger shows another entry. $2,400 for Daniel's textbooks and dormitory. That winter was harsh. The electricity bill at my apartment reached $85. I remember standing at the utility counter, my gloves soaked with snow, the paper bill limp in my hand. I paid it with shaking fingers, then skipped heating for 2 nights, wrapping myself in 2 coats and a wool blanket. I thought, if I endure this cold, Daniel will never have to. The ledger records my sacrifices with brutal precision. April 2004, sold my wedding ring, $600 cash to cover the hospital fee when Daniel's wife gave birth. July 2006, took out a small loan, $5,000, when Daniel lost his job during the recession. Every line, every withdrawal, carved another notch in my body's strength. I told myself it was worth it. Love makes martyrs out of parents, but sometimes, late at night, doubt slipped in. Was I naive to believe that sacrifice would be repaid with love? Was I buying affection without knowing it? I would silence those questions by turning back to Daniel's voice in memory. "Someday, a house by the sea, Mom." The ledger isn't just paper, it's a mirror. On one page, I see myself younger, proud, writing checks with trembling hands but steady faith. On another, I see the shadows creeping in small moments I ignored. Like the time I visited him in New York, carrying 2 suitcases full of home-cooked food. Daniel wrinkled his nose when he hugged me. "Mom, you smell like bleach," he said, stepping back. I had just finished a 12-hour shift, scrubbing bedpans and disinfecting rooms. His tone wasn't cruel, just thoughtless. But it stung. Or the time I handed him an envelope of cash for his internship expenses. He took it quickly, eyes darting away, as though ashamed or entitled. I couldn't tell which. Tiny cracks, invisible at the time, but together they were warnings of the wall that would one day rise between us. The hardest entry in the ledger is February 2010, 1,200 again, the same amount as that very first tuition payment. This time, it wasn't for school. It was for rent on the apartment Daniel shared with his wife and child. I remember wiring the money at the bank. The clerk asked, "Do you want to set up an automatic transfer every month?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. My voice didn't waver, but my stomach did. Automatic. The word sounded efficient, loyal, permanent. I didn't realize it also meant invisible, that my sacrifice would blend into the background noise of bills and balances, unnoticed, unthanked. Night after night, I ate noodles. I folded hospital gowns. I circled numbers in the ledger with red ink. 1,000 doll, 1,200, 1,200. My life became a rhythm of depletion. Sometimes, in the quiet, I would whisper, maybe this is what motherhood means. Bleeding quietly so your child can fly. And he did fly. Daniel rose, degree in hand, career opportunities, a family of his own. I watched with pride, even as my spine curved from years of labor. I didn't see the shadow his wings were casting over me. The irony is unbearable now. All those years, I thought I was buying his freedom. Instead, I was selling mine. Looking at the ledger today, the ink bleeds like wounds. The green cover is scarred with scratches. I run my fingers over it, as though over old cuts that never healed. I shake my head, whispering to myself, maybe I was too naive. Maybe I believed too much in the myth that love and money could braid together without choking me. But the truth is there, undeniable, on every page. Daniel's promise. The house by the sea was never built. Instead, my sacrifices became the foundation for something else. Entitlement. And that entitlement grew bold enough to look me in the eye, 40 years later, and say, adults pay rent, Mom. You're not an exception. It was a Tuesday night. The kind of night when the house is so still you can hear the tick of the clock like a heartbeat you don't trust. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the green bank ledger open beside my laptop. The glow of the screen lit up the numbers that had ruled my life for decades. 1,200. There it was again, bright and merciless on the online transfer page. The figure pulsed on the screen like a warning light. I had typed it in automatically, my fingers following the habit carved into them over 10 long years. But this time, I didn't press send. I stared at the number until my eyes watered. I could feel my pulse in my temples. My chest was tight, my palms damp. The cursor blinked, patient and relentless. All I had to do was click, and the money would leave me again. Quietly, obediently, invisibly. Inside my head, the questions slammed one after another. If I keep going, how much longer can I hold this house? Die. If I keep going, will I die with nothing but debts in my name? If I keep going, will Daniel ever see me as anything but a bank account? Jasky. If I keep going, will I lose not just my money, but my dignity? Each question was a hammer, pounding against the walls I had built out of excuses. I looked around the room. The curtains I had sewn myself 30 years ago. The clock on the wall, a gift from my late husband. The worn wooden chair that had carried my weight through grief and celebration alike. If I keep sending that money, even this house will not be mine. The thought landed heavy. This wasn't about generosity anymore. It wasn't about being a good mother. It was about survival. My finger hovered over the mousepad. My hand shook, the tremor of a body caught between habit and rebellion. I could almost hear Daniel's voice in my head. Adults pay rent, Mom. And then, another voice, quieter, older but stronger, rose inside me. My own voice. No. Adults also set boundaries, and I am still an adult. I inhaled. The air scraped down my throat. My hand trembled. But then I pressed cancel transfer. The click was soft, almost nothing, but to me, it roared. It sounded like a gavel striking wood, like a chain snapping, like a door slamming shut. My whole body jolted, as though I had broken something sacred. I leaned back in my chair, breathless. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, but underneath the fear was something else. Something clean, something fierce. Freedom. But it wasn't triumph. Not yet. Fear clawed at me. What if he storms in tomorrow, demanding? 2. What if he brings papers for me to sign? Lawyers, threats, see what? What if he disowns me completely? Sickness. My throat closed at that last thought. Losing my son's love would be unbearable. But then I asked myself, do I really have his love now? Or just his demands? The silence answered for me. I folded my hands over the ledger, staring at the red-inked numbers marching down its pages. Each one was a sacrifice, a scar. This has to stop, I whispered out loud. My voice cracked, but didn't break. The words hung in the kitchen, and for the first time in years, I believed them. The night stretched on, but I didn't move. I sat at that table like a soldier who had just fired her first shot, knowing the battle was far from over. My body shook with adrenaline, but my spine straightened. No one else heard it, but I did. The sound of my own chains rattling loose. Something shifted inside me. Before, I had been trembling, apologetic, forever bending under the weight of guilt and obligation. Now, even with fear pressing down, my sentences came sharper, shorter, stronger. I would no longer be a victim. That night, I closed the laptop, slid the ledger into the drawer, and locked it. My hand was still trembling when I turned the key, but the sound of the lock snapping into place steadied me. I whispered into the quiet. That night, I buried the ATM version of myself. And in the stillness, I knew something had ended and something else had just begun. The knock on my door was not gentle. It rattled the frame, sharp and insistent. I knew that rhythm. Daniel's. My stomach tightened. The clock on the wall read 7:45 p.m., the hour when winter darkness presses close against the windows. I rose from my chair slowly, my knees stiff, my breath shallow. When I opened the door, Daniel was already halfway inside, his wife behind him. She carried a leather folder pressed against her chest like a shield. The living room smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I had lit earlier, but their presence turned the air heavy, metallic. Daniel's shoes tracked in cold dirt from outside, each step loud against the wooden floor. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. He walked straight to the table, dropped the folder, and flipped it open. Papers fanned out across the surface, their edges sharp under the lamp's light. "Just sign the power of attorney, Mom," Daniel said. His tone was clipped, efficient, as if we were strangers concluding business. "It's easier for everyone." I stared at the papers. Black ink, neat lines, legal language I didn't fully understand, but the intent was clear. I would be handing over my life. "No, Daniel," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled in my lap. "My money is not your entitlement." His wife, Lisa, stepped forward, her voice coated in sugar but laced with steel. "We're not trying to hurt you, Margaret. This is for your safety, fellow 78. What if something happens? Don't you want Daniel to take care of everything?" I looked at her, then at Daniel. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on me. I could almost hear the words he wasn't saying. "Sign, or else." The silence stretched. The lamp flickered once, as if sensing the tension. Daniel leaned closer, palms flat on the table. "Mom, stop making this harder than it needs to be." I folded my hands, though my fingers twitched. "What you're asking is not care. It's control." He scoffed, pushing a page toward me with his index finger. "Don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." "Paperwork that would erase me," I whispered. Lisa's smile thinned. "Margaret, you've always been generous. Think of this as the natural next step. Families share. Families trust." "Trust," I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. If this is trust, why does it feel like a trap? Daniel's eyes narrowed. His patience was slipping. He tapped the pen against the table, each click like a countdown. "Sign it," he said flatly, "or we'll have no choice but to take this further." The words chilled me. Further could only mean one thing: court, lawyers, battles. I stared at my son. My own flesh and blood, standing in my living room, threatening me. The boy who once promised me a house by the sea was now cornering me with documents meant to strip me of everything. The moment broke something inside me. I pushed the papers back across the table. My hands shook, but my voice did not. No. Daniel straightened, his face hardening. Do you realize what you're doing? You're sabotaging your own future. My future is mine, I said. Not yours to manage. His lips curled into a half smile, cruel and cold. You'll regret this. The air in the room felt like it might shatter. I rose slowly from my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. My knees wobbled, but my spine locked straight. I looked him in the eye, the same eyes that once looked up at me for comfort after nightmares. Not anymore. I drew in a breath, steadying the storm inside me. My voice cut through the silence. I am not an ATM with feelings. The words landed between us like a hammer. For the first time, Daniel flinched, just barely. Lisa's eyes darted away. We stood there, the three of us, locked in a triangle of betrayal and defiance. The only sound was the ticking clock, each second louder than the last. Daniel's face hardened again, colder than steel. If that's how you want it, he said, snatching the papers back into the folder. He turned toward the door, his movements sharp, angry. Lisa followed, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. She didn't say goodbye. The door slammed, the vibration rattling the picture frames on the wall. Then, silence. I sank back into my chair. My hands were still trembling, but something inside me was burning now. Not fear, resolve. The folder was gone, but the echo of Daniel's demand lingered. My son had come into my home expecting obedience. He had left with a truth he didn't want to hear. That was the night my son realized his mother was no longer his wallet. I sat in the quiet, my breath uneven, the lavender candle flickering weakly on the table. Outside, the winter wind howled against the windows, but inside me, a different wind was rising, cold, sharp, unyielding. The envelope came on a rainy morning. Its paper was thick, official, stamped with the county court seal. My hands trembled as I pulled it from the mailbox. Rainwater soaked through my gloves, blurring the black ink before I even slid it open. Inside, a summons. Daniel had filed a petition declaring me mentally unfit to manage finances. I sank onto the porch step, the rain soaking through my sweater. My eyes scanned the words over and over, though they blurred into nothing but betrayal. The paper shook so violently in my hands, I thought it might tear. My son was not just asking for money anymore. He was declaring me incompetent. He was putting my sanity on trial. I clutched the green bank ledger to my chest that night, its pages mottled with tears. Each number I had written, every transfer, every sacrifice. They had been evidence of devotion. Now, they felt like exhibits in a case against me. The neighborhood whispers arrived almost immediately. At the corner store, I caught Mrs. Eco Patel looking at me a beat too long. At church, two women leaned together, their heads bent, their voices low. I could hear fragments. Lost her mind, Daniel, court papers. It wasn't enough that Daniel had betrayed me. Now the whole town seemed ready to believe him. The first hearing date was typed clearly. March 14, 9:30 a.m. The words glared at me from the summons, unyielding. That night, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mrs. Johnson, my neighbor of 20 years, standing in the drizzle with a pie tin covered in foil. Her face was lined with both age and kindness. "I heard, Margaret," she said softly, "but you're not alone. Fight back." The words cracked something inside me. For the first time since the envelope arrived, I felt a sliver of strength. The next morning, I searched for help. My fingers shook as I dialed numbers, my voice faltering as I explained my situation. Finally, a name surfaced from a friend at church, Richard Lee, a lawyer known for his persistence and compassion. His office smelled of leather and dust, bookshelves heavy with legal volumes. Richard was in his 50s, hair graying at the temples, his gaze sharp but kind. He listened as I poured out my story. The years of transfers, the sacrifices, the confrontation. He nodded slowly, then folded his hands on the desk. We'll need every receipt, every call log, every piece of paper that shows your mind is as sharp as ever, he said. His voice was calm, steady. Truth is your best weapon. I swallowed hard. Do you think I can win? He looked at me squarely. If you're willing to fight, yes. But the fight was cruel. At the preliminary hearing, Daniel's lawyer presented affidavits from two so-called witnesses. One was a distant cousin I hadn't seen in years. He claimed I had forgotten his name at a barbecue. Another was Daniel's coworker, who swore he had overheard me confuse days of the week on a phone call. Lies. Exaggerations. Small human slips twisted into accusations of incompetence. I wanted to shout. To tell the judge that I remembered every penny, every bill, every birthday card. But my lawyer squeezed my arm, reminding me to stay composed. Back home, I spread out my own evidence on the kitchen table. Bank statements in neat stacks. Phone logs carefully highlighted. Even grocery receipts, faded but legible. The green ledger lay open in the center, its red ink sharp against the yellowing pages. I traced a finger down a line. December 2015, 1-200. My handwriting was steady, my memory precise. This proves I'm not lost, I whispered. This proves I've been keeping track all along. Yet, doubt gnawed at me. At night, alone in bed, I replayed Daniel's accusations. She's unstable. She forgets. She can't manage. What if the court believed him? What if I lost not just my money, but the right to decide anything at all? I turned restlessly, clutching the pillow. Is this how my story ends? Stripped of dignity by the very child I raised. Light came from unexpected places. Mrs. Johnson checked in daily, bringing soup and small notes of encouragement. One page at a time, she said as she helped me sort receipts. That's how truth stacks up. A young nurse from the hospital where I once worked heard of my case and volunteered to testify. She trained me, the nurse said over the phone. Her mind is sharper than half the staff's. I'll tell them. Their support was a breath of air in my drowning. Still, Daniel's campaign grew darker. Rumors spread like wildfire. That I had left the stove on 3 times in 1 week. That I wandered the street at night in confusion. None of it was true. But gossip has a way of staining the air, even if it isn't seen. At the grocery store, a clerk asked if I needed help counting change. I flushed red, shoving the coins into his hand. Every sideways glance felt like another verdict against me. The pressure built. Court documents multiplied, each envelope heavier than the last. Richard met with me weekly, his desk filling with the evidence we gathered. He reassured me, but I could see the strain in his eyes. One night, after sorting receipts until my eyes blurred, I closed the ledger and pressed my forehead against its cover. Was I blind? I whispered. Did I raise a son who only sees me as weak? Did I mistake devotion for chains? The questions circled endlessly, offering no peace. And yet, each morning, I forced myself to continue. I labeled files, highlighted dates, organized documents into boxes. Every small act was defiance. Because if I gave up, Daniel would win by default. And I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. As March approached, the tension became unbearable. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror-lined face. Gray hair, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But behind the fatigue, I saw something else. Resolve. I straightened my back, whispered to the woman in the mirror. You are still here. You are still you. The night before our next court date, I sat with Richard in his office. He outlined our case. Evidence lined up like soldiers ready for battle. But my heart was heavy. What if the judge doesn't believe me? I asked quietly. Richard paused, then said, The truth doesn't always win fast, but it has weight. And weight eventually tips the scale. I walked home through the cold evening, clutching my scarf tighter. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the pavement. I thought of Daniel as a child, running to me with open arms. I thought of Daniel now, filing papers to erase me. And I asked myself, with tears freezing on my cheeks, if my own son sees me as unfit, how can I prove to the world that I am still whole? It happened on an ordinary Thursday morning, in the most unremarkable way. I was sorting through a stack of envelopes Richard had given me, copies of documents Daniel's lawyer had submitted. The papers smelled faintly of ink and dust, their edges stiff and cold beneath my fingertips. One sheet slipped free and landed face up on the table. My eyes froze. There it was. My name, Margaret Wilson, signed in cursive at the bottom of a power of attorney form. The date was fresh, the letters elegant, but the hand was not mine. The signature curved too smoothly, the loops too generous. My real hand shakes slightly when I sign, my letters slanting inward like tired shoulders. This version was confident, rehearsed, alive in a way I no longer write. I stared at it until the room began to tilt. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. My breath came short, uneven. The paper felt icy against my skin, as if it had been pulled from a grave. This is my name. But not my hand. This is my life. But not my choice. But not my choice. My heart hammered so hard, I thought it might burst. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my mind racing. Then a wave of nausea hit me. I clutched the edge of the table, steadying myself as bile burned the back of my throat. So, this is what my son thinks of me, dead while I'm still breathing. The thought sliced clean through my chest. I ran my fingers across the forged signature, almost expecting the ink to smear under my touch. But it was dry, permanent, cold. My own son had signed me away. Not just my money, but my existence. On that paper, I was already erased. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was ink, legal, filed. I whispered to the empty kitchen, "Daniel, why?" The silence that answered was heavier than any scream. Inside my head, the questions pounded. Did he sit at a desk, practicing my name until it looked believable? Did Lisa watch, coaching him, smiling as each stroke of the pen buried me deeper? CDD. Did they imagine me gone already? Out of the way? Each question was another knife, twisting deeper. But after the shock came something else. Heat. My tears dried mid-cheek, my vision sharpened. My breath steadied. If he thought this paper would bury me, he underestimated the woman who had survived decades of double shifts, winters without heat, and the grief of widowhood. I wasn't dead. Not yet. That afternoon, I walked into Richard's office with the forged document clutched in my hand. He looked up as I entered, his brow furrowing at the sight of my face. "Margaret? What's wrong?" I slammed the paper down on his desk, my voice hoarse but steady. "Look at this." He scanned the page, then looked back at me sharply. "This isn't your signature." "No," I said. My hands were still shaking, but my eyes burned with clarity. "It's Daniel's idea of me. His perfect mother. Silent, compliant, already gone." Richard's jaw tightened. "This changes everything. We'll expose it. A forgery this blatant won't stand." I sank into the chair, opposite him. For the first time since the summons, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like someone holding a weapon. My voice was low, but it carried weight. If my son has already written me off the page, then I'll write myself back on it, with truth. That night, I returned home and laid the forged paper beside my green ledger. The two sat side by side, a battle of ink. One filled with years of sacrifice, the other with a single lie that tried to erase them. I touched the ledger first, its cover soft from years of handling. Then my fingers brushed the cold legal page. This one is theirs, I thought. But this one? This one is mine. 2. I didn't sleep. I sat at the table, the documents spread before me, the clock ticking toward midnight. My fear had not vanished, but it had shifted. It no longer paralyzed me. It pushed me forward. Because if Daniel wanted a war, I would not surrender quietly. Richard's office became my war room. Piles of papers stacked high on his desk, folders open like battle maps. Every receipt, every phone record, every transfer slip was a piece of armor. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting a cold glow over the evidence of my life. We spread the documents out like cards on a table. Richard tapped each one with his pen. Bank statements, check. Transfer logs, check. Medical records, check. Even the security camera footage from the day you canceled the payment. These are your weapons, Margaret. Weapons. The word echoed inside me. For years, I had handed Daniel money without a second thought, disarming myself. Now, at last, I was gathering a different kind of currency, truth. Back at home, my dining table turned into a second battlefield. The green ledger sat open at the center, pages bristling with sticky notes and red highlights. Around it, receipts, notarized letters, even copies of emails I had printed out at the library. I moved through the house with purpose, opening drawers, rifling through boxes. My hands, once trembling with fear, were steady now. Each scrap of paper I found felt like sharpening a blade. I whispered to myself as I worked, "This time, you are not giving. This time, you are fighting." Neighbors drifted in to help, like quiet reinforcements. Mrs. Johnson arrived first, balancing a tray of teacups in one hand and a folder of grocery receipts in the other. "You've saved everything," she marveled. "Old habits," I said with a tired smile. "Turns out, they may save me." Later, the young nurse I had trained years ago came by, offering her testimony. "They'll listen to me," she said firmly. "They'll know your mind is sharp." Their presence filled the room with warmth. For once, I didn't feel like an old woman cornered. I felt like a general with an army, small but fierce. But the hardest preparation wasn't on paper. It was in my own voice. Richard handed me a list of likely questions. "Practice them," he urged. "The judge needs to hear strength, not fear." That night, I stood before the bathroom mirror. The overhead light was harsh, showing every crease, every line etched by time. I cleared my throat and began. "My name is Margaret Wilson." The words came out shaky, my reflection blurring with tears. My voice cracked halfway through the first sentence. Shame burned in my chest. I tried again. "My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am fully capable of managing my life." Still weak, still trembling. I pressed my palms against the sink, tears dripping onto the porcelain. All those years of silence, of swallowing words to keep the peace. That's why my voice falters now. I've taught it to be small. But the next night, I returned to the mirror. I spoke louder, straighter. "My name is Margaret Wilson. I remember every sacrifice I made. I am not incompetent. I am not invisible." The reflection staring back at me was still lined with age, but her eyes, my eyes were brighter. By the third night, my tone had shifted. No longer pleading, no longer wavering. Firm, clear. A declaration. I even recorded myself on Richard's suggestion. The first playback was painful, full of hesitation. The second, better. By the fifth, the voice in the speaker didn't sound like a victim anymore. It sounded like someone who had survived, and who refused to be erased. Memories surfaced while I practiced. Times I had stayed silent when Daniel spoke sharply. Moments when I swallowed hurt rather than confront him. But now, standing before the mirror, I promised myself, this time, silence will not save me. Only truth will. The night before court, Mrs. Persing, Johnson stopped by one last time. She looked at me. My notes spread neatly across the table, my shoulders squared and smiled. "You've raised a son, Margaret," she said gently. "Now, raise yourself." Her words sank deep. That evening, I rehearsed one final time. The room was quiet except for my own voice. I didn't whisper. I didn't stammer. I looked my reflection straight in the eye and spoke. "I am Margaret Wilson. I know who I am. I know what I've given. And I will not be erased." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was full of resolve. The courthouse smelled like waxed wood and rain-soaked wool. Light fell through high windows in cold, pale panels, striping the benches and the polished aisle like a metronome set to judgment. The ceiling arched higher than a church I once loved. White, immaculate, indifferent. When the bailiff called the case, his voice bounced off the stone and oak and landed heavy in my chest. I sat at counsel table beside Richard Lee. He wore a navy suit and a face that looked carved from patience. Across from us sat Daniel with his attorney and Lisa. Daniel's tie was navy too, but louder, as if declaring a victory not yet won. He didn't look at me. I tried not to look at him, but my eyes kept reaching for the boy I once knew, and finding a man I didn't. The judge entered, black robe, silver hair, steady eyes. The room shifted to attention. A gavel rose and fell, one clean strike. The sound ran through my bones like a bell turned to iron. "Good morning," the judge said. "We're here on the petition regarding the capacity of Mrs. Petition, Margaret Wilson." Capacity. Such a small word to hold a life. I pressed my palm against the green bank ledger in my lap. The leather felt warm from my hands, worn to velvet at the corners. The pages inside carried my handwriting, my memory, my years. I held it the way a soldier might hold a talisman before the charge. The clerk called the docket number. The clock in the rear ticked with precise, disinterested clicks. Lisa smoothed her skirt. Richard clicked his pen closed, like holstering a blade. "Counsel," the judge said, looking at Daniel's attorney, "you may proceed." The opposing lawyer rose, smile crisp, voice trained to sound like reason. "Your Honor, the petitioner is Mrs. Zismel, Wilson's son. This is not about greed. It's about protection. Over recent months, Mrs. Era, Wilson has exhibited confusion, forgetting dates, mismanaging transfers, neglecting routine tasks. We have affidavits attesting to her instability. The family is only seeking to ensure her safety by establishing power of attorney." A few heads in the gallery nodded in that vague, public way that nods at anything that sounds orderly. I felt the old shame start to rise. Thin, choking, familiar. I pressed the ledger harder to my ribs and reminded myself to breathe. Richard stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Day. Wilson is 78, yes. She is not incapacitated. She has handled her affairs meticulously for decades, which the petitioner knows because she funded his life for decades. The petition is a strategy in search of a justification. The facts and the witnesses will show it." "Very well," the judge said. "Let's hear the witnesses." Round 1. Their punch. They called the cousin first. Harold, someone I hadn't seen in 15 years. He walked to the stand with a solemnity that looked borrowed. He raised his right hand, swore the oath, sat like a man who had practiced sitting. "Mr. Harold," Daniel's attorney began, "did you observe any strange behavior from Mrs. Dallius, Wilson at the family barbecue last spring?" "Yes," Harold said, eyes sliding toward me like he hoped I had shrunk. "She forgot my name. Twice." I didn't forget his name. I stumbled on it because Daniel had just told me he couldn't stay for dessert, and I was trying not to cry into a bowl of potato salad. "Anything else?" She confused Tuesday with Wednesday on a phone call. Seemed scattered. The word landed with a theatrical tremble. A murmur ran through the benches. Richard didn't flinch. "No questions," he said, and I realized he meant to leave Harold suspended in his own thin air. They called Daniel's coworker next. Slick hair, polished shoes, a gold watch that reflected the overhead light like a signal flare. He claimed he'd overheard me mixing up medications when Daniel asked me about his wife's prescription. I had asked him to repeat the dosage so I could write it down and check the generic name with the pharmacist. Caution. Recast as incompetence. And in your opinion, the attorney said, did she seem confused? Yes. The coworker nodded. Confused. The word multiplied. Confused. 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 A word is a candle. Repeat it enough, and people stop seeing who's holding the match. Thank you, the attorney said, and sat with the satisfied rustle of a man placing a rook exactly where he planned. Daniel took the stand last in their sequence. When he swore to tell the truth, something in my chest tore a little, as if the oath were a rope pulled through me. Mr. Wilson, his lawyer asked, soft as sympathy, why did you file this petition? Daniel looked down, looked up, let the practiced pause linger. My mother needs help. She refuses it. She cancels transfers, she can't track, forgets bills, shuts people out, makes paranoid accusations. I love her. He swallowed, perfectly timed. This is for her own good. My mouth opened. Empty air rushed in. Lisa dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue that did not wrinkle. Nothing further, the attorney said. Richard rose, and for the first time his voice held an edge you could shave with. Mr. Wilson, your mother funded your tuition, yes? Daniel blinked. Irrelevant. Answer the question. Yes. Funded your rent for years. Temporarily. How much per month? Daniel's jaw shifted. 1,200. For how many months? No idea. Richard flipped a page in his binder with surgical precision. 367 transfers of 1,200 over more than 10 years. That's $400 and $400. If she can track all that, would you call her confused? The room rearranged itself around the number. A low whistle leaked from somewhere in the back before the bailiff's glare stitched it shut. She didn't track it, Daniel said. It was automatic. Until she canceled it, Richard replied, intentionally on March 2nd, 10:13 p.m., from her home computer. We have the time-stamped bank record and security camera footage of her at her desk. His eyes held Daniel's a beat. Does that look like confusion or a boundary? Daniel's face cooled to stone. She's unstable. There it was again, the script's favorite line. It sounded smaller now. No further questions, Richard said, and sat. Round 2. Our guard and counter-defense, call your witnesses, the judge said. Richard nodded. Mrs. Alvarez. She was my pharmacist, and walked with the grace of someone who has spent a lifetime matching names to pills and people to careful instructions. She took the oath, adjusted her glasses, and looked at me with a kindness that steadied the floor. Mrs. Alvarez, Richard said, do you know the respondent? For 22 years, she said. She asks detailed questions. She keeps a list of medications for herself and her neighbors. She corrects me if we change a generic supplier without warning. She keeps track better than most 50-year-olds. Has she ever confused prescriptions? Never. Thank you. Any cross? The judge asked. Daniel's attorney frowned. No questions. Next came Tom Weller, a locksmith with arms like cables and fingers gentle as a pianist. He swore in and smoothed his work shirt as if it were formal wear. Mr. Weller, did you change Mrs. Sate Wilson's locks this month? Yes, ma'am, Tom said, nodding toward the judge. She asked me to. Said she needed new keys, new boundaries. Paid me in cash, exact change. Asked for a receipt, then checked the date on it twice and filed it in a folder labeled Home Security. Richard smiled. She file it in front of you? Yup. Alphabetized. Laughter rang from the gallery and died at the judge's small lift of a hand. Any cross? The judge asked. None, the attorney said tightly. Then Nurse Bailey, the one I had trained years ago. She sat straighter than her years, silver earrings flashing like little flags of defiance. "Mrs. Wilson taught me triage," she said. "She still remembers patient protocols most interns forget. Her memory is meticulous. Ask her about the influenza ward in 1998, and she'll tell you how many beds, what order, which ventilator squeaked." "What order?" Richard asked. Nurse Bailey didn't miss a beat. Odd numbers by the window. She said light mattered. "Thank you." Again, no cross. Finally, Richard called Mrs. Johnson. The courtroom air warmed a degree when she took the stand. "Mrs. Johnson," Richard said, "do you have an opinion about your neighbor's mental state?" "I do," she said, and her voice had the solid dignity of a church bell. "She pays her bills on time. She keeps a ledger that would make an accountant weep with joy. And when her son came to bully her with papers, she didn't lash out. She set a boundary calmly. That's not confusion. That's courage." A hush spread like a blanket. Even Daniel looked down. "Thank you," Richard said. The judge nodded, inked a note, and turned to us. "Is that all?" Richard didn't sit. He lifted a single page from his binder, with an economy of movement that made the hair rise on my arms. "One more exhibit, Your Honor." He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. From where I sat, I could see only the bottom edge of the paper and a curve of ink. The counterfeit flourish of my name. The petitioner submitted this power of attorney with what appears to be Mrs. Zees's B. Wilson's signature, Richard said, voice even. "We've had it examined by a forensic document analyst. The conclusion is unambiguous. Forgery. The pressure points do not match. The baseline slants are inconsistent with age-related tremor, and the loops are characteristic of a younger, different hand." For a breathless second, the courtroom was a field where all noise went to die. The judge looked at the document longer than anyone else had looked at me in months. When she finally raised her gaze, it carried weight. "Counsel for petitioner?" she asked, mild as frost. "Care to explain?" Daniel's lawyer started a sentence and abandoned it. Lisa stared at the floor. Daniel's jaw jumped, then locked. I heard the rustle of the gallery. The body's involuntary sound for, "We see you." "Frosted," the judge said to Richard. "No further witnesses, Your Honor." Richard said softly, "Just one more voice." He turned to me. "Mrs. Wilson." What I said when I stood. My knees shook when I rose, but the fear did not steer. The ledger was in my hand when I faced the judge. The room, my son. The air tasted like dust and electricity. "My name is Margaret Wilson," I began, and my voice startled me with how level it was. "I am 78 years old. I am not helpless. I am not insane." The room contracted to a single point. In that point stood the woman I had rehearsed into being. I have worked as a nurse. I have balanced the pain of strangers and the books of my own life. For more than a decade, I transferred $1,200 each month to my son. I kept track of every dollar, every date. I cooked cheap to help him eat better. I froze in winter so he could stay warm. When he needed rent, I sent it. When his wife needed hospital fees, I sold my wedding ring and paid them. The earliest transfer in this ledger is September 1999. The most recent, before I chose to stop, is March 2 of this year at 10:13 p.m. The time I canceled that transfer, the first time I said no. I looked at Daniel. He stared at a spot beyond my shoulder as if the truth were a glare. "I may be old," I said, and I let the words take up all the space they demanded. "But I am not insane. I remember every dollar, every tear, every sacrifice. I remember the first shoes he outgrew, and the last time he thanked me. I remember the day my husband died, and how I learned to fix the boiler by reading the manual out loud in an empty basement. I remember how to love. I remember how to stop when love is turned into a leash. something warm burned in my sternum. It felt like a door, long nailed shut, was starting to splinter. I refuse to be erased, I said. Not by forged ink. Not by rumor. Not by a son who confuses his entitlement for my duty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words laid themselves into the wood of the room like another grain line. I lowered my eyes to the ledger, then back up to the judge. That's all. When I sat, the bench beneath me felt less like a defendant's seat and more like a dock at the edge of a wide, honest water. Verdict. The judge folded her hands. She did not rush. A fly tested a pane of glass and gave up. Someone coughed and was afraid of the sound. This court, she said finally, has heard arguments about protection. It has also seen evidence of pattern and intent. The respondent's records, corroborated by witnesses, demonstrate competent management of her affairs. The petitioner's submission of a forged document is deeply troubling and undermines the credibility of his position. She paused, and my heart stuttered once hard enough to shake my ribs. The petition is denied. Mrs. Wilson retains full rights. The gavel rose and fell. The sound was cleaner this time, and when it touched the wood, a long-held rope in me went slack. That gavel didn't just hit wood, it broke the chains on my life. I exhaled so sharply, it felt like years were leaving my lungs. Richard put a steady hand on my arm. On the other side of the aisle, Lisa's lips parted, then pressed to a thin line. Daniel's face folded into something unreadable, a mask cracking from the inside. The judge added, "Given the circumstances of the forged document, this court reserves the right to refer this matter for further investigation." She looked toward Daniel's table with a gaze that did not blink. Another gavel tap. The case was closed. After a quiet flood, people stood. The gallery became a river of coats and shoes and whispers. The fluorescent lights hummed the same indifferent song, but it no longer sounded like a threat. Mrs. Johnson waited just beyond the rail. When I reached her, she wrapped me in arms that smelled like cinnamon and old books. "You did it," she said into my hair. "You stood." "I did," I said, and my voice surprised me again by not breaking. "I did." Richard shook my hand with the formality of victory. "You carried your own case," he said. "The truth helped, but your voice won it." We walked out through double doors, into a hallway swimming with afternoon light. It fell warm on my face, and in it I could feel something unknotting between my shoulder blades. The ledger weighed less in my arms, as if the pages themselves had exhaled. At the far end of the hall, Daniel stood with Lisa, talking urgently to his lawyer. He glanced up. For a moment, our eyes met. In his gaze, I saw not the boy I raised, nor the man who tried to erase me, but a person caught in the web of choices he himself had spun. He looked away first. I didn't chase him. No part of me moved in his direction. I stepped toward the glass doors instead, where sun and cold fought in the doorway, where the world waited without picking sides. Outside, the sky was a hard blue scraped clean by wind. The courthouse steps gleamed. I set one foot down, then the other. My breath rose in white streamers and drifted like blessings. The city sounded new. Cars, crosswalks, heel taps, a distant siren. Ordinary things that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with being alive. I tightened my hold on the ledger, and felt the old leather answer my palm like a friend's hand. I had not won everything. There were losses that courts cannot count, and gavels cannot restore. A space opened inside me that used to be filled with the future I imagined with my son. But the emptiness was honest. Air moved through it. Light could find it. A pigeon scolded a stranger for dropping a crust. The stranger laughed. I laughed too, softly, without permission. On the walk home, the winter sun slid across my shoulders like a shawl. The neighborhood looked the same. Hedges clipped, mailboxes dented, lawns pretending it's spring. But it felt different, as if the street itself had shifted a degree and now tilted toward freedom. At my door, The new lock clicked cleanly, confidently. Tom had installed it straight. My key slid in like a promise kept to myself. Inside, the house held its breath and then released it when I did. I set the ledger on the table and traced the spine with one finger. Not erased, I said to the quiet. Never again. Somewhere, far away, a judge put down her pen and reached for her coat. Somewhere else, a roomer ran out of breath. In my kitchen, nothing happened, and that nothing felt like grace. I boiled water for tea. The kettle sang. The cup warmed my hands. I didn't check the clock. I didn't flinch at the phone. I stood in my own small room with my own fierce breath and listened to the light move across the wall. The battle had been public. The peace was private. It fit me. And when the steam rose in silver threads, I lifted the cup and found it light. The house greeted me with silence, the kind that presses against your ears until you can hear your own pulse. The courthouse had been full of voices. Lawyers, clerks, witnesses, even the shuffle of strangers' shoes. But here, nothing moved. The stillness was absolute, almost accusatory. I closed the door behind me. The new lock clicked firmly, a sound I once found reassuring. Tonight, it echoed too loud, as if sealing me into a cage of my own thoughts. I set the green ledger on the kitchen table, the same table where so many battles had begun. It lay there quietly, neither weapon nor shield anymore, just a book of numbers and scars. I touched its spine and realized my hand was trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion that lived in my bones. I walked to the hallway mirror. The face that stared back was mine, yet not. Wrinkles deeper, eyes ringed with purple. But there was also something else, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. I won, I whispered to the reflection. My lips moved slowly, as if the words were foreign. The silence answered. Empty. I tried again, louder. I won. But the mirror only returned the hollow echo. Victory, when spoken to glass, sounded lonely. I won, I said a third time. Then softer, almost ashamed. But why does victory feel so empty? That night, sleep refused me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where moonlight traced faint patterns across the plaster. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel on the witness stand, his jaw hard, his eyes cold. His voice replayed, each word sharper than the last. She's unstable. She's confused. She needs control. The judge's gavel had struck down his petition, but the sound didn't erase his words. They lingered, etched deeper than any court record. I turned onto my side, clutched the blanket tighter. Still awake. Near midnight, I rose and padded back to the kitchen. The ledger was still on the table. I opened it, flipping through pages filled with neat numbers, each one a memory. Tuition, rent, hospital bills, grocery lists. My handwriting stood steady, though my heart faltered. I ran a finger down one line. July 2006, 1200. I remembered the exact phone call when Daniel told me he had lost his job, his voice cracking. I sent the money without hesitation. That moment had felt like love. Tonight, the same line looked like proof of a chain. I poured hot water into a mug and watched the steam rise, curling like smoke from an invisible fire. The warmth seeped into my hands, but it didn't reach my chest. I sipped slowly. Bitter tea, bitter night. I thought of Richard's words. Your voice won this case. I thought of Mrs. Johnson's embrace outside the courtroom. Their support was real. But the absence of Daniel's love filled the room louder than any kindness could. My thoughts turned restless, spinning in circles. What if he never speaks to me again? What if I've lost him forever? Was the price too high? B.A. Then another voice answered from deep inside. But hadn't I already lost him, the moment he forged my name? Chappé. The truth cut sharp, but clean. I rose and opened the back door. The garden lay under silver moonlight, damp from the rain. The air smelled of earth, fresh and raw. I stepped outside barefoot, the grass cool against my skin. The night wrapped around me, quiet, heavy, yet alive. Somewhere in the dark, a cricket sang. Somewhere further, a dog barked once and fell silent again. I breathed deeply, the cool air filling my lungs. It steadied me more than the tea had. For the first time since the trial, I allowed myself to cry. Not the tears of panic, not the hot rush of betrayal, but slow, tired drops that rolled down without resistance. They fell onto the grass and vanished, leaving no stain. The moon watched, impassive. The stars flickered like questions without answers. I thought again. I won. Yet, I lost. And then the sentence reshaped itself. Perhaps I had to lose him, to win myself. I returned inside, calmer, though still hollow. The mirror in the hallway reflected me once more. My hair disheveled, my eyes red, but my posture straighter than before. I touched the glass with my fingertips. "You are still here," I told the woman staring back, "and that has to be enough for now." When dawn came, pale light slid across the kitchen floor. I sat with the ledger closed before me, hands folded on top. The battle was over. The war within me was not. But there was a shift, small but undeniable. I was breathing more steadily. I was alive in my own house, under my own name, by my own choice. And that mattered. The first morning in my new apartment by the sea, I woke to the sound of gulls. Their cries were sharp, but not accusing. Just alive. Just free. I rose slowly, stretching joints that had grown stiff from years of carrying burdens. Barefoot, I padded across the wooden floor. No carpet weighed it down. No shadows clung to corners. I opened the sliding door to the balcony. The salt air rushed in, crisp and bracing. The horizon stretched wide, endless blue upon blue. I carried a cup of coffee in both hands, lifted it gently, and for once, it felt light. Not the anchor of a phone clattering from my palm. Not the ledger pressed against my chest in fear. Just warmth, steam, and a taste that belonged only to me. It struck me then. The symmetry of it all. At the beginning of this long road, I had sat in my kitchen holding a phone that felt like stone, my son's words sinking me like chains. Now, I stood with a porcelain cup that weighed almost nothing, my arms unburdened, my chest unclenched. The house I left behind, its curtains, its echoing rooms, its courtroom memories, belonged to another lifetime. I sold it not with grief, but with clarity, the way one sheds a coat grown too heavy for spring. I filled my days differently now. In the afternoons, I joined a small group that gathered at the community center to paint. My hands, once calloused from years of hospital work and weary from clutching receipts, now held brushes that slid colors into shapes. My first canvas was clumsy. A crooked seascape. Blues bleeding into grays. But I hung it on the wall anyway. Imperfect, but mine. On Tuesdays, I helped serve meals at the shelter. I ladled soup, handed out bread, listened to stories. For years, I had thought giving meant emptying myself into one person's endless hunger. Now, I saw the difference. When you give to strangers, to community, the gift multiplies, not drains. Their thank yous filled spaces no transfer ever had. Neighbors came to know me not as Daniel's mother, but simply as Margaret. We shared recipes, swapped novels, laughed over garden mishaps. I felt something bloom that I hadn't known I was missing, belonging without condition. The green ledger came with me, tucked into a box I almost left behind but couldn't. One evening, I placed it on my new table by the balcony. I opened it, expecting pain. But this time, the columns of numbers looked less like wounds and more like proof of survival, of endurance, of love misplaced but real. I touched a line. December 2001, 2,400 tuition and dormitory. Sacrifice. Once, it had meant sacrifice. Now, It was simply a record of what I had chosen, what I could acknowledge, and what I could finally release. The ledger was no longer a chain. It was a relic, like an old scar. I closed it softly and slid it onto a shelf. Not hidden, not burning, just resting. Sometimes, the ache still came. At the market, I'd see a man Daniel's age reach for his mother's hand, and my chest would tighten. At night, a dream would bring back his boyish laugh, and I'd wake with tears on my pillow. But grief no longer ruled me. It visited, like weather, and then passed, because I had chosen to live again. One evening, after a painting session, Mrs. Johnson called me. Her voice crackled with pride. "Margaret, you sound lighter." "I think I am," I said. "It turns out freedom doesn't feel like flying. It feels like walking barefoot on your own floor." I learned something simple yet profound. To love others, you must first love yourself. Not with vanity, not with walls too high, but with the quiet dignity of knowing your worth. I had spent decades pouring myself out, believing that sacrifice alone was the measure of love. But sacrifice without respect corrodes. Now, I knew, setting boundaries was not cruelty. It was survival. And survival, finally, could grow into joy. On my balcony, the cup empty, I leaned against the railing and watched the tide retreat, leaving silver streaks on the sand. A child ran after the waves, laughing, his footprints washing away before he could turn back. I smiled. The sea did not keep what wasn't meant to stay. Neither would I. I traded a son who saw me as a wallet for a life that sees me as a woman. The horizon shimmered. The gulls circled and cried. I breathed in salt, sun, and the vastness of a life still mine. And at last, I felt free. Thank you for walking this road with me, Margaret Wilson, once a wallet, now the keeper of my own key. If you have read these pages to the very end, it means you have carried my story with you. The shock of betrayal, the weight of sacrifice, the trembling decision to fight back, the courtroom gavel that set me free, and the quiet mornings by the sea where I learned to breathe again. Your presence here is not small. It means my pain did not echo into emptiness. It found a listener. And for that, I am deeply grateful. I have shared the darkest hours of my motherhood. The nights when I mistook sacrifice for love. The mornings when my son's words turned my chest into rubble. The long weeks where gossip painted me unstable. And the endless rehearsals before a mirror where I taught my voice not to tremble anymore. I have also shared the moments of light. The neighbors who stood beside me. The lawyer who believed me. The ledger that transformed from chain to relic. And the new life that began with a single cup of coffee on a balcony by the sea. But now I want to turn this question toward you. If one day, your own child turned you into a tool, would you keep paying? Or stand for your dignity? It is not an easy question. It cuts into the softest part of us, the part that believes blood must always mean love. But silence has a price, and so does surrender. I am not asking you to hate. I am not asking you to fight a courtroom battle like mine. I am only asking you to reflect. What boundaries have you denied yourself in the name of family, of love, of duty? And what might change if you claimed them? If this story touched you, please leave a comment below. Tell me what you would choose. Tell me if you have ever stood where I stood, or if you fear you might one day. Your voice matters. It might be the courage another reader needs at this very moment. Share this story if you believe it can reach someone else who is trembling, unsure, caught between love and survival. You never know whose hand you might steady just by pressing share. And if you want to walk with me further, follow along. Each week, I bring another true story of loss, of betrayal, but also of boundaries, of survival, and of quiet transformations. We do not heal in isolation. We heal together, by telling and by listening. I close this chapter, not as a victim, but as a woman who learned to value her own freedom. I am not an ATM with feelings. I am the keeper of my freedom's key.